Things going on in the world. So I hope everybody is picking up a lot of new information here. During the break, I saw Johnny had a question about desktop versus online Outlook. And like I said earlier, everybody, I will try to give you as if you're looking for like a real checklist type of thing, I can see if I can find a good checklist for you. But here are the things that I think about specifically when I think about the desktop version of Outlook and the online version of Outlook. And here we go. Sorry, this isn't loading very quickly. Let's see if I can grab this one. All right, so the online version of Outlook. Let's take a look at it real quick. So the buttons and things are definitely in different places between the online version of Outlook and the desktop version of Outlook. And you'll find that Microsoft is trying to simplify the ribbon overall to give you fewer buttons to choose from. Now, you will see that there are the ability to categorize things, the ability to flag things, and stuff like that. And over here on the far right, you can expand it out to give it the classic ribbon. But if you notice, everybody, for the first thing that I use that I don't see in the online version of Outlook is Quick Steps. So if you are somebody who uses Quick Steps like I do, Quick Steps are basically like a little local macro that you could use to help organize yourself. And Quick Steps are not available to you when you're using the online version of Outlook. And in the same way, if you have any Outlook macros, if you use any VBA code or anything like that, the desktop version is the only version that will allow you to do that. However, the interesting thing about the online version of Outlook, and this goes in line with what Chris is saying in the Q&A as well, because the online version of Outlook is, and this is going to come as shock to you, it's the online version, right? It's online. It's always available no matter where you go. And it's also always running. Something that my software classes very often have a problem with is if you take a lot of time in the desktop version of Outlook to invent rules in the desktop version of Outlook, most of these rules only run if you have your copy of Outlook on your PC open and running. So if you shut down your machine, all of your Outlook rules are just sitting there doing nothing. On the other hand, when you have Outlook rules in the online version of Outlook, these rules are always running because it's online. So I'll say it this way. Depending on the way that you work, depending on the amount of stuff that you've built up with macros and quick steps and stuff like that, it can be more difficult to adapt to the online version. But I would say there's a large and growing chunk of the population that's just saying, I like the online version. It's always there. The rules run, and they pretty much just go with the online version instead of the desktop version. So like I said, I can give you more of a checklist rundown for other instances, or for more elaborate descriptions there. But those are the major facets that I want to talk about. Okay. So everybody, this is actually a perfect time for us to pop open our first poll question of this segment, which is the question, if you need a report, who are you reporting to? How many different reports are you going to try to build? How complicated is this scenario for you? So before the break, I was asked the question, could you make a report out of your plan, right? Take Planner and push out a report based on it. And so what I did there was export to Excel. That allows me to make one type of report. But there are other options out there, a lot of different permutations on this. Okay. A sizable percentage of you have to report to 3 or more different groups of people. Enjoy. All right. So if that's the case, like what can we do to make all of this work as easily as possible? So I'm about to jump into talking about Power Automate, but before I do, I put something on our list today because I feel like it's one of those things that it gets lost in the shuffle, and it's a really, really critical piece of the puzzle that can change the way you work for forever, basically. So before I go into that in great depth and detail, let me first start off with this basic diagram right here. So up until now, I would say that everything that I have talked to you about has fallen under the umbrella of what's called Microsoft 365. So of the different services the Microsoft offers, you can think of Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, OneNote, Visio, SharePoint, Teams, OneNote or OneDrive, Planner, Forms, Microsoft To Do, Stream. Think of all of those systems as simply Microsoft 365. That's the day-to-day productivity software. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but Microsoft makes a lot of apps. And so there's also Microsoft Dynamics. There's also Microsoft Azure. Azure is for cloud computing. Dynamics is for CRMs and other business intelligence data. And because they have developed all of these different online offerings, and because, of course, there are so many other online apps that are out there, like Todoist and Asana and Trello and Jira and millions of other online apps, Microsoft looked at that situation and said, okay, we need to find some way to bridge the gap, to be able to connect Microsoft Dynamics to 365, to be able to create a connection between Azure and Asana, or to be able to create a connection between Microsoft 365 and Jira, or anything else that's out there that could be useful and productive for everybody. And they called that system the Power Platform. And you'll know this by the names that start with the word power. And the ones that most people, I think the one that is the most popular, the most widely understood, is Power BI. Power BI, BI here stands for business intelligence. This is the data tool. But overall, all of these tools serve one basic purpose. And the basic purpose goes like this. There are many systems that need to be connected, and it is not reasonable to say that IT can help you connect all those services anymore. Instead, we need what they would call a citizen developer, meaning somebody who's got a day job, right? So you have a normal job where you don't have to do any programming or any IT services. And then you realize that you have to do some business reporting, but that your data is in a lot of different systems. Or you want to automate your business workflows, but you realize that you've got Outlook and SharePoint and Teams and 4 other apps that you want to connect together, and it starts to feel like it's going to be too much. So all of these apps have one thing in common, and that is they want to let people use a low code or no code environment to be able to solve their problems. So like I said, Power BI, it solves the problem of I have some data in an Oracle database, I have some data in a SharePoint site, I have some data in a CSV file, and I want to analyze all of it. Power Apps, that solves the problem of everybody in my organization needs to have an app on their phone where they can push a button and something magically happens. Virtual agents, this is for chat bots. Power Pages, this is for external facing pages that provide information. And then the one we're going to spend most of the rest of the block on is Power Automate, which is, as the name suggests, our tool for automation. It allows us to take different services and say, if something happens here, let's automatically connect to another service. But before I go into Power Automate, I want to introduce you, if you haven't already started to use it, to the fact that the development of Power BI significantly changes the way that I use Excel every day. And the reason for that is that when they developed Power BI, they also developed little tools that are called Power Query, Power Pivot, and Power View. And 2 out of the 3 of those tools are available to you in Excel. So here's what I want to show you as we move forward here. So the example for today's session has been that we are going to have all of these different departments put out budget planning spreadsheets. And so there are, going to be workbooks for each of the different departments within the organization. Now, what I'd like to suggest here, everybody, is that you start working in the following way. If you start up an Excel workbook and you want to be able to make a list of things that are as useful as possible, here's how you do it. First of all, let's say that we are keeping track of, and I'm going to say here, we're going to keep track of the type of expense and the amount of the expense. Okay, so we're going to have a column over here for the type of expense and a column over here for the amount of the expense. And, if it's food, maybe the amount of the expense is $1,500. And if it's travel, maybe the amount of the expense is $35.40 or something like that. Okay, so everybody, we're in an Excel spreadsheet. We are making a little list, and maybe we do some formatting or stuff to this. But everybody, this is the thing not a lot of people are doing, and it is really, really valuable. If you click onto your data like this, if you go to the Insert tab at the top of the screen, and you say that actually this thing that I'm selected on should be turned into a table. The idea here with the table is that instead of just a bunch of cells that are filled in, this will be a named entity inside the spreadsheet that you can then reference much, much more easily. So I'm going to click here on Table and click OK. And you can see that it sort of puts a border around my data and really nicely formats that data. So if here, for example, I also do maintenance and I enter in $7,500 for maintenance, all of a sudden the table gets bigger. And when I click onto this table, I see that at the top of the screen, there is a table design tab and that I can name that table. Now, all the tables that I create start the same way. They start with the letters TBL, short for table, and then, maybe it's called budget or something like that. So I will call this table TBL budget and hit enter. And now I can go ahead and save this spreadsheet to that location. And I'll say this is for finance. So what I'm recommending to you is the following, everybody. When you put a list of entries into an Excel file, rather than having a bunch of cells that just happen to be next to each other, filled in with numbers and things like that, I want you to start the process by having your data stored in a table. Then, and I'm going to go ahead and do one more here. So again, the process is you are doing, columns of data, and maybe this is maintenance, and maybe it's $5,600. What you do is you select the data, you go to Insert, and you click on Table. And that means that inside of this spreadsheet, this table is properly acknowledged as being a separate thing that has a name. And here I'm going to click in there and type in TBL budget. And here I'll do publications and do $700 worth of publications. And then I'll simply save this file. Excuse me. And I'm going to save this one. Which department is this one gonna be? City clerk. All right. So now I have 4 spreadsheets for the city clerk, finance department, the police department, and public works. And this is to Kelly's question here. Kelly's asking the question, can you reuse the same name? So everybody, within the same workbook, you're only allowed to have one table called TBL budget, for example. But if you notice, I went to each of these spreadsheets and I used the same name for that table over and over again, and you're about to see why. So I have 4 spreadsheets, and I know, because I made them, that each of the 4 spreadsheets has a table called TBL budget. Watch how easy this next part is. I go to an Excel file, and what you do is you go to the top of your screen to the Data tab. Now, the Data tab is where Microsoft has stashed this amazing tool called Power Query. Power Query is a tool for something called ETL. The E in ETL stands for extract the data, pull the data in. The T in ETL stands for transform the data or clean it up. And the L stands for load. So now everybody, if I go to the Data tab, I can see that I could go get data from a CSV file, from a website, from a table, from a picture. And then here under the Get Data drop-down menu, I could get it from Excel, from a PDF, or you see right here, I can actually get data from everything in a folder. So if I put 25 different department spreadsheets in the same folder together, and they all have the same table, you know what's about to happen here? Absolute magic. Just beautiful, stunning magic is about to happen. So I click on From File and then From Folder, and then I say, oh, yeah, here's my folder. I just go over, find it, There it is. There it is. Okay, so this workbooks folder has some files in it. I don't know which ones yet, but I click on open and it tells me, okay, I'll connect to it. I can see that there is a city clerk spreadsheet, a finance spreadsheet, a police spreadsheet, and a public works spreadsheet. And I go, yeah, that looks right. And you see right down here, everybody, I can combine those files together. So I can go here to where it says combine them together and transform them. And in there, this is why I put the tables, because I can easily say in all the files, there is a table called TBL budget. You see that? There's TBL budget. It has maintenance and publications for these amounts in the first file, right? That's the first one. And then the second file looks like this. And then the third file looks like this. And then the fourth file looks like this. They all have that same starting point of having that budget table. So to Kelly's question, can you reuse the name of the table? Not inside the same file, but if you have each of these files have the same table called the budget table, woo. So I click OK. And it's going to run through those files for me. And there it is. From the city clerk spreadsheet, here are the 2 entries. From the finance spreadsheet, here are the 3 entries. From the police spreadsheet, here are those entries. From the public works spreadsheet, here are these entries. Exactly right, Chris. So there is a lot of benefit if your job is compiling things from different places to creating a template that people can use and just say, if you use this template for me, my job will be 50,000 times easier, right? So at that point, all you have to do is hit close and load, and that drops the data all in this page right here. You can do anything you want with it. And then here's the really great part, everybody. So you may have come up in your mind of the idea that the term Power Query or extracting, transforming, and loading the data, both of those felt complicated, and maybe you weren't quite sure what the intent of those things were. So let me explain this a little bit more thoroughly. The word, well, first of all, the word power, just leave that aside. Microsoft loves the word power. Everything is power, everything, right? PowerPoint, Power BI, Power Pages, yada, yada, yada. Who cares about the word power? That doesn't matter. Query. Why do they call it Power Query? It's because this isn't just an action that happened. A query, which is a little snippet of code, got written on our behalf. And that little snippet of code says, go over to that folder over there, and whatever's in there, compile it for me. And then that query, that little snippet of code, got saved into this file. So that means that if I go over to the city clerk spreadsheet and I add some new entries to it, right? So here is maintenance. Oh, not maintenance. Let's say food. Let's say there were $5,400 worth of food. Let's say there was travel. Let's say there was $1,250 worth of travel. And let's say there was training. And let's say there was $4,500 worth of training. Now I save that file, right? And the city clerk data has changed, but we have a query in place that says, get all the data out of the city clerk file. So now look at all the refresh buttons you can see. So on the table design tab, there's a refresh button right here. On the queries over here on the right, there's a refresh button over here. If you right click on it, there's a refresh button right here. And what we're about to see is right now there are 2 entries for city clerk. There's about to be 4 or maybe 5. I don't know. Let's say we hit refresh and all of a sudden there are 5 entries for city clerk. So we have a dynamic connection to all of these files that as the data changes, as you add more records, as you change the existing records, this will consistently keep up with that. Let me push pause here. Does everybody see how that works? Does anybody have any questions, problems, or concerns for me? And while I see if anybody's typing anything. Yeah, I'll just reiterate on this one. So when we set up this class, the concept was that this would be built around an example of something that needed to happen in the world. And in this case, we went with, we're trying to get the budget approved, right? And whenever you're working on a budget, you've got all of these spreadsheets sort of floating all over the place. And I find that basically every room I walk into, somebody has this job of hitting 25 different spreadsheets and staying on top of all of them and making sure that they've got the latest version of the data from all of them. And it turns out that almost none of those folks have ever heard of Power Query, and it is absolutely number one, the tool for the job. Because anytime that you are trying to compile this data, compare this data with other things, etc., Power Query is the right tool for that job. Okay. Okay, so Travis is asking the question, maybe getting ahead of ourselves, but Could I insert column totals, for example, without it corrupting the data? Here's the thing I want everybody to work from, and that is, gotcha, yeah, insert rows all the way through, right? So everybody, as far as this is concerned, this is the guidance I want to give to you, okay? When it comes time to work with the raw data of something, this is a little bit different from the conversational data, right? And let me go ahead and answer this and answer that. Okay. So if your point for using the spreadsheet is to sort of dynamically have a back and forth about something, then great. Otherwise, the data that you are bringing in should be structured, right? And the structure shouldn't be messed up to much of an extent. Now, what would happen, for example, yeah, let me say, for example, here, let's go over to city clerk, right? And let's do something a little different here. Let's say that we did this a little bit differently. And we said there are going to be 3 entries for maintenance, like so. And then there's going to be a, let's say, a total for maintenance, like so. And let's say there's 3,200 and 1,200. And then right here, we do a sum function for these 3 entries. Now, what's going to happen with this? Well, everybody, if you think about it in these terms, it's pretty clear that this table thinks of the $10,000 as another entry in this table, right? However, if you noticed, I did something very specific. I decided to format this row so that it very clearly was different from the rest of them. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Close this down, and let's see what happens to begin with. I might right click and refresh. So you notice all those entries get fed in for maintenance, but also the total maintenance also got fed in. So we're going to have an issue here because the $10,000, and boy, look at me coming up with 3 entries that randomly came out to $10,000. I am a savant or something. Anyway. The problem with this is that it's just seen as raw data. 10,000 is just another entry, but this is easy for us to fix. So here, for example, remember everybody, they call it Power Query because we are writing a query and saving that query so we can always rerun it. But the other thing we can do is we can always go back and edit it. So over here on the right, you see that workbooks query on the right-hand side? I'm going to double click on it. It reopens to here. And now what you want to do is this. You can say, for example, you want to filter out all this total, or you can go into text filters and say it contains, and maybe if it contains something like, what is it? Let's say just if it contains total, for example, then maybe that would, oh, excuse me. We want does not contain, right? Does not contain the word total. So does not contain the word total could resolve this problem, but it's all about consistency of the data. So you do want simple tables. And if you are going to do something like those inserts of the row totals and things like that, you want some way to clearly define what's a row total and what's not a row total. One more example of this, everybody. I'm just going to hit close and load. So another example of this would be something like if we were to go in here and insert another column and say this column was the commentary, right? And this would be like, this is a total, that sort of thing. This sort of thing could help us to filter the data as it was coming through and keep us from having issues. But basically, we have this at our disposal as long as we know that we're bringing in all of that similar data and we need to exclude specific types of things. So how's that work for everybody? Anybody have any concerns, questions, things I can help you out with in this space here? Okay. So this is a good time for us to go ahead and just pop up the poll question number 2, which is, and this one's one of the very few where there's a right answer, everybody. What is the tool that I have been using for the last 10 minutes that is about ETL, extract, transform, and load? Okay. So overall, everybody, my guidance on this is that this tool, Power Query, so drastically changes our capability inside of a normal spreadsheet that it is 1,000% worth it to invest in this. Because anytime that you have to pull data from outside data sources, anytime that you need to combine similar data sources, anytime that you need to compare, or you need to VLOOKUP between data sources, I'm going to tell you this right now, everybody, if you use VLOOKUP, I want you to listen to me very carefully right now, okay? I don't use VLOOKUP anymore. I don't even use XLOOKUP. I only use Power Query for those types of things. Does that make some of you, I know, are VLOOKUP aficionados, and I was right there with you, but Power Query is thousands of times better at those types of things than conventional Excel is. While I'm waiting for you to all answer the correct answer on this is Power Query. I see a percentage of you are trying to mess with me right now. So yes, the ETL tool is called Power Query. Let me show you an example of one other thing that you can do in Power Query. So again, to reiterate here, everybody, if you go to the Data tab at the top of the screen, everything on the left side of the data ribbon is Power Query. Your ability to get data from an Excel file, a CSV file, from a PDF file, from a SharePoint folder, from a SQL Server database, IBM database, SAP database, from Azure, or from anything else under the sun, it's Power Query. This is the modern tool for this. But in addition to being able to get data from outside data sources, you actually also have this button here for table or range. And actually, let me see if I can find a quick one so that we can just have some fun together on this. I wasn't planning on doing this one, but let's see if I've got it in here. Not that one. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So everybody, I want to show you 2 examples that are nigh impossible to handle in Microsoft Excel. So here's the first example. You have the data laid out in a very pleasant little table like this one. And you've got some labels that haven't been auto-filled over here on the left, and you've spread the different quarters horizontally across the page. And then you realize that you need a simple version of this data to do analysis on. Everybody watch my screen very carefully. I click onto the data that needs to be transformed, that needs to be manipulated. I go to my data tab up here at the top of the screen. And over here, I have from table/range. When I click on from table/range, it selects the whole range and I click OK. Now, I want you to notice here, everybody, that, for example, with the country column, if you have a bunch of entries that need to be filled in from the values above them, all you have to do is use on the Transform tab this button to fill down. I click on this Fill button on the Transform tab, and I tell it to fill down. And that autofills all of those different countries really rather nicely for me. And then I can click on fiscal year 19 Q1, hold shift, and click on fiscal year 19 Q4. Now, if I want a single column of all the values labeled as what quarter they're associated with, what I'm going to do on the Transform tab is what's called unpivoting the columns. These 4 columns have been pivoted across the page, and so I am unpivoting. And when I click on it, there it is. I now have a column with all the values in it with Q1, 2, 3, and 4 down the column right there. So this allows me to manipulate this data in vastly faster and simpler ways than conventional Excel would do for me. Did everybody see how that worked? Anybody have any questions or problems there? At the end of any of these processes, you go to the Home tab and you hit Close and Load, and the good version of that data gets dropped onto the page. Now, everybody, I'd like to show you something that is literally impossible in Excel. Okay, so you see on my screen right now, I have a column that lists people's names separated by semicolons. Now, some of you will be sophisticated Excel users, and you will know that you have a tool in Excel called text to columns. But here's the thing. I don't actually want a column that says Marcos Fuentes with a column next to it that says Chibui with a column next to it that says Sarah Kumari. No, what I want instead is I want each of the people in that cell to have their own record. So I want to be able to split this column into multiple rows or multiple records. Now, that's simply not possible in Excel. You would spend a lot of time splitting text to columns and then doing a copy and paste with the what is it? It's something with a T. Anyway, transpose. It would be very, very long to do. Everybody watch how easy this is. I click on my data. I go to my data tab at the top of the screen and I click on From Table/Range. And I click OK. And that data has been loaded into the Power Query editor for me. Now, you ready for this one? So here's my roster column. I don't like my roster column. So I go to the top of the screen and I see there's a button that allows me to split this column up. And already, for those of you who are text to columns people, you'll see by delimiter, number of characters, positions, lowercase to uppercase, uppercase to lowercase, digit to non-digit, non-digit to digit. Those are better than Excel can do right now. I'm going to go one step further. I'm going to click on by delimiter, and I'm going to say that the delimiter is in fact a semicolon. But then here's the trick, everybody. You ready? Every time you hit a semicolon, under advanced options right here, split that into a new row. I click OK. Voila. On January 1st, Marcos Fuentes, Chibui, Sarah Kumari, and Ariel Gonzalez were on the roster. So those types of transformations, that capacity for pulling data in from other data sources, all of these are reasons why Power Query is, I would say, the #1 thing to learn this decade if it comes to making your spreadsheets better. Now, before we pivot off of this, are there any things that you would like to ask about in the world of things outside of Power Automate? So this was an explanation of how the Power Platform affects our work in Excel. We have Power Query at our disposal. We also have Power Pivot at our disposal. We could use these tools inside of Power BI or in an Excel spreadsheet. And we aren't going to be talking about Power Apps, Power Virtual Agents, or Power Pages for the rest of the day today, but we are going to be moving over to Power Automate. Okay, things are looking good. Glad to see it. So ladies and gentlemen, 10 more minutes here before our last break, and then we'll go into the more deep dive of how we use Power Automate. So let's talk about a little bit about Power Automate here and do our poll question here in a moment. Some of you are experienced with the Microsoft world for the past few decades. If you are, you might remember that in the old days, if you were in SharePoint in the old days, there was this thing called SharePoint workflows. And SharePoint workflows, the name kind of suggests it. It's for stuff that lives in SharePoint, right? So yeah, we're using SharePoint right now, but because of the modern age, we also are using OneDrive. We're also using Planner. We're also using Forms. We're also using Teams. We're also using OneNote. So SharePoint isn't the only thing anymore. So a few years back, Microsoft invented a new product called Microsoft Flow, which was supposed to replace SharePoint workflows. And it was supposed to be across the different cloud services. And then their eyes got a little bit bigger, and they decided that they would instead make a really big product called Power Automate that had different things under it that were a little bit dissimilar from one another. So these days, the program called Power Automate is not actually one program anymore. So the one that we're going to be talking about most today is what we call Power Automate in the cloud. In the cloud being the online tools for online services. There are also, however, Power Automate Desktop and Power Automate Business Processes. So if we talk about Power Automate Cloud, as I said a moment ago, we started off with this concept of automating the workflow and the communication in SharePoint itself. Then they invented Microsoft Flow, but then they decided to make Power Automate. And these days, Power Automate in the cloud creates what's called a cloud flow. So unfortunately, you kind of have to have these different terms in your head. The Power Automate creates a flow, which is an automation of some kind. We also have Power Automate Desktop. For those of you who have ever used a macro on a desktop app on your PC, Power Automate Desktop is like a macro for your PC. It is a separate install on your PC that can automatically do things to your files, to different programs. If you want to, you can create a desktop flow that will open an app, click a couple of buttons, close that app, open another app, click a couple of buttons, close that app, and just keep on working on your behalf. So it really is an automated thing that takes over your computer for a while. Whereas Power Automate Cloud is something that says, hey, let's just automatically do something in Teams for them. Let's just automatically do something in SharePoint for them, stuff like that. And then business processes are for the entire organization to have what we call an unattended workflow. An unattended workflow is something that we set up and we don't have to push any buttons for. It just automatically handles things across the business. Again, we're not going to talk about that here today. And for those of you who'd like to play along with me in looking at Power Automate in the cloud, here's what you do. You pull up your favorite web browser and log into the website office.com. And then you click onto the waffle in the top left-hand corner. Again, that 9-point grid button. And on that menu that opens up, if you have to, click on All Apps, and Power Automate will be after Power Apps and before Power BI. So we click on to Power Automate there, and it opens up this website. Here we go. So this is powerautomate.com. And if you click on the Create button on the left-hand side, it shows you the cloud flows, the desktop flow, and the business process flow over here on the right. So before we go any farther, everybody, let's go ahead and pop up the last poll question of this section. And this is just a little poll question to see if you've done any other automation. So have you done any macros on your PC? Have you used Google Home or any other home automation? Have you used Zapier for any or if this then that? I see it went in as a single choice. Feel free, whichever one you want. I think at this point, a lot of us have tried at least one of these. I know that I have done a little bit of each. A lot of lights in my house these days are tied to my Google Home at this point. So everybody, while you're answering that, Bill's got a question in the Q&A box here. First thing I want to point out here, well, first of all, Power BI, is it standard? Power BI is free, but your IT staff may have decided not to necessarily make it available to everybody. So it is something you can download for free, and it shouldn't really be a big concern if you do have to request it from anybody. But part two to this is, if you click the waffle, you may not see Power BI on this first panel. Make sure you click through to all apps. And if you see, for example, everybody, Power Apps, Power Automate, and Power BI are, of course, all part of the Power Platform, as we were just talking about before. And again, Power BI is a free installation. So most IT staff should allow for this to happen, but you may not see it on your screen immediately. Yeah. And then the same thing with Power Automate. They may just sort of disable your ability to use Power Automate. Definitely something worth asking about. It is a free thing that you don't have to, you have to pay for. Okay. All right. And looking good. So here we are on making a new automation in Power Automate. And here's the way I want you to think about it, everybody. Power Automate is a no-code / low-code automation service. I would say that basically every automation I've ever seen has required at least a touch of an acknowledgement to coding. You don't necessarily have to write anything, but you have to understand what it means to make decisions in code, and you have to understand what it means for something to build up over time using variables and things like that. So in the last part of today's session, I'll walk you through the use of a couple of different workflows. And a quick note here, everybody. I always use the term flow and workflow interchangeably. Sorry, that's just habit because I used to make SharePoint workflows for like a decade before this came around. But I would recommend absolutely everybody start not by trying to invent something from scratch, but instead by clicking on templates over here on the left and then searching for a templated workflow that solves a problem that you have. So for example, let's say that based on our previous area, we decided that we wanted to email around a report about what happens in Planner, right? So I might type email Planner. Now, when you type in the search box, email Planner, you want to pay attention to the order in which the icons show up, because that tells you what happens in this workflow. So this first one has Outlook first and then Planner. So already I can tell you that it's trying to use Outlook to create something in Planner. And sure enough, it says, if you have an event that's coming up, will make a task for you in Planner. That's kind of the opposite of what I want. I want to go to Planner and make an email off of my plan. So here we have, oh, here's forms first and then Planner. So when somebody submits a form, make a task in Planner. Or when an email arrives, create a task. But then right here, create a daily summary of Planner tasks broken down by bucket. So this is the sort of thing that we'll be using as soon as we get back after our last break today. All right, everybody. So hold on to everything. In 10 minutes when we come back, we'll be making